think these guys aren't that good. And I'm willing to go prove that. So go put me in the UFC and give me Islam first fight.
So Dana White is watching this.
Yeah.
What's your message to him?
Sign me. Let's do it.
Over the weekend, Dylan Danis took on Logan Paul on the Prime card, which was one of the biggest crossover boxing events of all time and one of the biggest boxing events of this year, period. Now, many people have their different opinions on the idea of crossover boxing, but at the end of the day, everyone is talking about it. Danis had beef with the likes of KSI, Jake Paul, and Logan Paul, and was originally going to take on KSI, but he dropped out of that fight, and then going onto this card, he decided to take on Logan Paul instead. Now, this fight was one that was very hyped up for months on end, as Danis was tweeting about Logan Paul's fiance almost every single day, which was his way of building up the hype for the fight, and it worked. Logan Paul didn't find this funny, as Danis did, and in the midst of that, he's going to be suing him over the images and tweets he was putting out.
She's saying that her reputation was her. I don't know her name. I know what she looks like half naked. I know a whole bunch of dudes' names that she's been with. I don't know her name. There wasn't a reputation to damage. That's within her head. And I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but the most famous thing about her is that she's engaged to Logan Paul.
At the end of the day, though, Danis, who had never boxed before and is really only known for his jiu-jitsu, got in the ring and made this one of the most anticipated bouts of the year. I mean, this guy has virtually no experience with any stand-up, and going into a boxing event where Logan Paul isn't the greatest boxer of all time by any means. Logan Paul's been training for boxing for years on end, and like Dylan Danis has said, he is not a boxer and he doesn't train for it. But talking about his MMA prowess, I think the UFC should reach out to this guy. And I know that might be a hot take, but let me give you some reasons why I think they would benefit from getting a guy like Dylan Danis. Now, let's start off with how Dylan Danis got here. Dylan Danis has had a name within the MMA, fighting, just in general, overall combat world for a long time, and for a guy that really hasn't done that much, especially before this Logan Paul KSI fight came along, he's been able to stay relevant, which is very surprising because, like I said, this is a guy that if you asked 100 people what Dylan Danis does, I don't know if even half of them could really name what he's a specialist in or where he came from. They kind of just know the name, and there's a good reason why. Dylan Danis started to come up within the BJJ world, just the jiu-jitsu world overall, between 2014 through 2016, and he was actually a very highly touted prospect. He competed in a lot of different championships, got a lot of different accolades throughout this time, ended up being a brown belt. Overall, just a very good prospect, and then a lot of things decided to change for him. In 2016, it came out that he would be joining Conor McGregor's team as a coach, training partner overall for his rematch against Nate Diaz. And then after that, as we all know, where a lot of people found out who Dylan Danis was after the Khabib fight, where Khabib jumped the fence, the notorious video that we've seen, and fought Dylan Danis outside of the octagon. And this is really where his name started to take off.
Look at him. Oh, and now Khabib jumps the fence. No. And he's going right at Dylan Danis. Mayhem. Oh, no.
Now, being linked to Conor McGregor, he, in 2018, was scheduled to make his debut at Bellator 198, where he would win in a first-round toe hold submission. He had another fight at Bellator 222 and won by armbar in the first round. And still, he has 2 fights left on his Bellator contract. We'll see exactly what happens with that. But if he's going to be going to the UFC, I'm sure they'll be able to buy him out, figure something out there. But he is 2-0 with his MMA bouts, both by submission. Now, obviously, going from an influencer boxing card against Logan Paul to the UFC would be a massive jump. There's no reason why he wouldn't be able to at least be somewhat successful in the UFC. Now, I know this may be a hot take overall. I know that the Dylan Danis fan club, a lot of people either love this guy or hate this guy. There isn't really a middle ground. And I would say that I'm more of a supporter than a hater of this guy, and I do think he could be at least somewhat successful in the UFC, especially right now with the amount of grapplers and wrestlers that we are seeing. Guys like Bo Nickel, and I'm not comparing the all-time college wrestler Bo Nickel to Dylan Danis' skill set, but overall, I mean, both of these guys, both elite in a grappling sense, and Bo Nickel has been at least somewhat successful so far. He's a guy that could be on a fast track to a UFC championship bout, and I'm not saying that Dylan Danis should be on a fast track to a UFC belt, but he should be able to go out there, and honestly, if you're Dana White, what is harming you if you do sign him? We have seen so many UFC fighters, especially within the past few years, that are pretty much all talk, and their skill level doesn't match up with their talking level, but it gets people's eyes on the sport. That's why the UFC has become this massive sport and pinnacle, and is reaching levels that Dana White, when he bought, probably never expected to. I mean, the MMA and the UFC world was kind of an afterthought for a long time, but Dana White building up these guys, having guys in like Conor McGregor, which Dylan Danis learns from in the octagon and outside of the octagon, are the main reasons why they have been so successful. And speaking of Conor McGregor, as we know, Conor McGregor, one of the all-time UFC greats, no matter how you want to look at it, in and outside of the octagon. I mean, the guy that has the biggest draw in UFC history is supposedly coming back. And if Dylan Danis is serious about this UFC bout, which I do think he is, if you get him a contract, this is very different from influencer boxing. That, at the end of the day, was just a paycheck for him. If you get him in there, locked in, training with McGregor like he has been, then he will go for this 100%. And McGregor should be fighting within the next few months, potentially on that UFC 300 card. I don't see a world where Dylan Danis, who has said that he wants to fight even tomorrow, you give him some months now to prepare, and he could be on that card with Conor McGregor against, I mean, anyone else you want to throw out there. It doesn't even have to be the biggest name in the sport, because Dylan Danis will be able to bring eyeballs and attention to him and his opponent like we have seen. Now, I know in the end, some people may not like this. They may not want to see Dylan Danis in the UFC, especially after that performance against Logan Paul. But let's not forget that this is a guy who is a jiu-jitsu expert, not a boxer at all. And there is a very big difference. We see a lot of UFC fighters right now who aren't that great in the striking game and can still go out there and get some victories. You have two paths with Dylan Danis if you sign him in the UFC. You start him off like a guy who doesn't have a name behind him. You have him build his way up with some smaller fights. Or this guy who talks a lot, you throw him to the wolves and he might get absolutely embarrassed in one of these fights. But the eyes are going to be on him, and then you see what really happens. At the end of the day, no matter the skill set of this guy, no matter the training, we don't really know his true potential in MMA, in the UFC, until we see him fight someone. Now, I know Dana White is friends with KSI, Logan Paul, business partners through Prime, but I'm pretty sure Conor McGregor has a bigger pull than both of those guys combined. He is the money horse for the UFC, and if he's coming back, maybe Dylan Danis fights on that card, on the undercard. Maybe he just fights in general for the UFC. But if he's really serious about this, if he goes in there with Conor McGregor, I think that he could potentially have a shot. Because at the end of the day, Dana White, a very big boxing fan, I know he was tuned into that fight. He did say a few things about it. But at the end of the day, he knows that Dylan Danis is not a boxer. And even if they throw him out there to the wolves in the UFC, could prove a point, and he's still going to get money out of it at the end of the day. Dana White and Dylan Danis, he's going to bring attention to these fights. He's going to be able to sell the card very well. Even if he fights a lower named guy, he can still go out there and at least give it a shot. He will probably be dedicated because it'll be in the MMA. It won't be this influencer boxing because it seems like he's done with that realm. And with that being said, we have reached the end of the video. Let me know down below what you guys think about this situation. I know there's going to be a lot of people on both sides, so I want to hear, do you think the UFC should give Dylan Danis a shot, or should Dana White and the rest of the company stay completely away from him? And I will see you guys in the next one.